recording of the event next to an online stream. And so I'm saying good evening to those of you and those of us who are joining from European time zones, and good morning maybe to those who might be joining from the other side of the pond. Welcome to our event, which has the title War and Education, and it's devoted to monitoring of the impact of the war on education in Ukraine, but also outside. The event is organized by the Civics Innovation Hub. Tonight, my colleague and co-founder of the Civics Innovation Hub, Caroline Hohenstein-Tomic, and myself, Luisa Slavkova, will moderate this, I hope, timely but also important conversation. Few words before we begin about who we are. The Civics Hub is a relatively young organization that is devoted to making sure that civic education is elevated to the expectations across Europe. So we're devoted to supporting both citizens, but also civic educators themselves live up to the tasks that they are supposed to fulfill these days. Now, this event is called War and Education, and is part of a program of our organizations that's called Disruptions. Disruptions is the most flexible, agile part of our work, which is really meant to help civic educators mainly, but also educators broadly across Europe and the world, to find a space, that safe space of room to discuss what is relevant and important, not only to them, but also to their target groups. Now, the context of our meeting tonight. Our colleagues from the think tank CEDOS who have joined us tonight and from Ukraine have started monitoring the war almost from day one in various aspects. And one of the aspects that they have been interested in is how the war is impacting education. And education is an important topic because education is very closely related to children, and children are the ones that are, I would assume, suffering the most from war. And education in a way is offering, or school is offering some sort of normality or reference point to normality, even if it is disrupted. So this is something we would like to discuss tonight. We would like to look into what is going on in the education sector in Ukraine, and then look at our colleagues and experts joining from other countries across Europe who can share with us how education is organized for Ukrainian refugees today, but not only, because obviously refugees are coming and are going across Europe for many decades, and there is experience from Austria to Turkey that is also relevant to take into account. And before handing over to my colleague, Caroline, I wanted to share just a few necessary but boring housekeeping rules. Please, as participants in this discussion, use the Q&A section to ask questions. As the speakers go through their inputs, it's good to have your feedback there. It can be questions, it can be comments. We will have designated moments throughout this hour and a half where we will go back to them and really take them up in the conversation. And one more time, this event is live streamed and recorded, so that everyone knows they should also behave in their reactions. Over to you, Caroline, from here on.
Thank you, Luisa. Thank you all for being here this afternoon. And I'm looking at the ever-raising number of participants, so this is really great that we actually can be here for the next hour and a half together and focusing on this important and difficult topic. I'd like to say a few words about CEDOS, the partner organization which is with us today. CEDOS was founded in 2010 as an independent think tank by a group of experts in social development. CEDOS is doing research of social problems, and it is orientated to finding solutions to those problems. Therefore, CEDOS engages also in public policy recommending and developing, and it promotes progressive change and supports those who engage for change in their communities. Monitoring the impact of the war on education, migration, housing, social protection, and the civil population is what CEDOS is currently doing in Ukraine. I have the great honor to introduce Yulia Nazarenko and Tatiana Sheryobkina, who join us from CEDOS and will present their findings of 2 reports today, or even a third one, which has been finalized in the meantime. Yulia Nazarenko is an analyst and project coordinator at CEDOS. She has a master's in history from Kiev University, National University, and Tatiana Sheryobkina is also an analyst and project coordinator at CEDOS with a bachelor in sociology and a master specialized in healthcare management, also from the University of Kiev, where she teaches research methodology and organization at the School of Public Health and Social Work. I'm now handing over to the 2 of you for the presentation of monitoring of developments in education in Ukraine against the background of the war. Please, the floor is yours.
Hi everyone, thank you for such nice greetings. I will start this presentation. We will try to tell you everything what is going on the last months and years for 20 minutes. The first point we should start from, it's next slide, please. Why do we have this conversation today? It's like big context, because in March of 2014, meeting the history of recent centuries, of course, the Russia Federation invaded Ukraine and the next Crimea, and then occupied part of 2 regions, Luhansk and Donetsk Oblast. And then this year on February 24th at 4 a.m. with the arrival of missiles, Russia launched a full-scale invasion from their side. But thanks to Ukrainian military, voluntaries, as well as international support, we can have a conversation today. Next slide, please. Before we start, I would like to say some points about the context of Ukrainian education for the last years. Next slide. The new government in Ukraine in 2014 has begun educational reform, and in particular, it started from the new law on higher education. And the key elements in the reform of higher education was the opportunity for Ukrainian students to take advantage of academic mobility and study at university abroad and elsewhere within the country. Universities started to receive funding not through manual distribution, but through a formula that took into account the performance of their work, including quality. Of course, students were given the right to choose some courses, to formulate their curriculum by themselves. And about secondary education, we started new Ukrainian school reform that provided qualitative changes in teaching and approaches to teaching, teacher training, re-equipment of classes for primary school, also a competency approach were introduced for all students from the 1st grade. Also, Ukraine's education was no longer managed by state administration that were far from local communities, but now local communities have the power to change, to manage education together with the ability to allocate funds, and they understood the local context. Also, it's about decentralization, and also children as well as teachers and students have free access to electronic textbook, not only paper books, Distance learning has also started since the beginning of the pandemic, and we had all Ukrainian online school, which children and teachers could access via the internet and television, and also educational institutions, as well as schools and universities, have academic, financial, human, and organization autonomy. This next slide, please. So it's just a few words on what we had for the last years. And with the start of the war, both in 2014 and this year, Russia is trying not only to occupy our territories, but also to change our culture. And in particular, education is one of the main points for them, as we understand. And in this presentation, we will talk about some of the key changes that are happening because of the war. And now, Yulia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tanya. Firstly, I want to tell you some general information just about the number of displaced and injured children in Ukraine. According to the United Nations data, 14.2 million people have been forced to leave their homes because of the war. 8 million moved within the country and 6.2 million went abroad. And most of these people are women and children. And as UNICEF reports that more than half of Ukrainian children, 4.3 out of 7.5 have been forced by war to leave their homes. And also, according to the Prosecutor General's Office of Ukraine, as of May the 16th, 229 children died and over 421 have been wounded due to the war. And speaking of the situation with education during the war, one of the important things that should be said is damaged and destroyed infrastructure by Russia's action in Ukraine. As you may know, education institutions have suffered bombing and shelling, and as a result, as of May the 16th, 144 institutions have been destroyed completely and 1,748 have been damaged. Almost 800 secondary education institutions have been damaged and 93 have been destroyed completely, and at least 37 university buildings have been damaged and 4 have been destroyed. And Kharkiv region has suffered one of the most because their 51 education institutions have been completely destroyed and 362 have been damaged. And also, for example, in Donetsk, Lugansk, Mykolaiv and Chernigiv regions, there are more than 100 institutions have been damaged. How education process occurs during the war all this time? The next day after the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Russian troops into Ukraine, the Ministry of Education and Science of Ukraine recommended pausing the education progress in education institutions at all levels and starting a 2-week vacation for all students and education workers. And since March the 14th, the education process has begun to resume in the regions where the security situation allowed it. And the decision as to where and how classes should be held were made by regional administrations and education institutions. Also, there was a project, Learning Without Borders, for grades 5th through 11th that was launched jointly by the Ministry of Education and Science and also the Ministry of Culture of Ukraine, as well as Ukrainian TV channels and online platforms. It broadcasts video lessons with the different subjects scheduled for each day. And it is based on the national-wide schedule of classes for students in grades 1st through 11th, which are held online, whereas the classes are also available in recorded form. And also private schools and NGOs also joined in on the organization of remote classes and providing free access to their educational resources. And what we have actually now as May the 16th, the education process at secondary education institutions was taking place remotely in 15 Ukrainian regions, including Kyiv. In some regions, education was organized partially, or schools were still on vacation, or studies had been paused depending on the community. Almost 3.6 million students went back to their studies, and 92,500 internally displaced children have joined the educational process. The education process at higher education institutions was taking place remotely in 17 Ukrainian regions. The students who have left their homes can resume their studies in their temporary locations of residence, both in Ukraine and abroad. And it applies to students both school and university, but also students who have been displaced within Ukraine can continue their studies as a part of academic mobility in universities which are located in safer regions of Ukraine. And the educational workers are able to work from any location of their temporary, including from abroad, if education institutions in localities of temporary residence of internally displaced teachers have vacancies, the teachers can be employed there if they wish so. Also, what is more important to say that education institutions in Ukraine is also have been used for different purposes. In the regions which receive internally displaced people, preschools and secondary schools have been serving as shelters for people who need temporary accommodation. Internally displaced people are accommodated in dormitories of professional and higher education institutions, and schools and preschools also act as hubs for collecting, sorting, and distributing humanitarian aid, while school buses are used for evacuation. And one more important thing that need to be mentioned about higher education is relocation of universities, because Ukraine already has experience in evacuating universities, because since 2014, after occupation of Donetsk and Lugansk region and also annexation of Crimea, some universities from that regions have been moved to safer cities within the same region or to other regions. And this process is happening again. And during the war, according to the Ministry of Education and Science, 17 universities have been relocated from temporary occupied territories or dangerous areas to safer regions. And there were universities from Donetsk, Lugansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson regions, and some universities have been relocated actually 2 times now, in 2015 and in 2022. For example, the Volodymyr Dal East Ukrainian National University has been evacuated from Severodonetsk to Kamenets-Podilsky, and the Lugansk Medical University has been evacuated from Rubizhne to Rivne, and actually both of them had previously been evacuated from Lugansk. That's all from me, and I'm passing the word again to Tatiana.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And when we are talking about occupied territories and education on that side, there are common 3 scenarios for education developed on that territories, and one of that scenarios when education institution continue working remotely according to Ukrainian curricula and to Ukrainian program. And children try to study, teachers try to work from home or whenever where they are located at that time. The other scenario is when the occupation government tries to resume the education process under its management, and they try to provide the Russian standards for teaching Ukrainian students and pupils. And the other scenario is when education process doesn't take place at all, and children do not study and nobody works. Of course, these scenarios can be only one alternative, or they can coexist. But in general, when we are talking about these scenarios, we see the common problems when Russian troops, actually, they're trying to Russify education in the occupied territories. And as Yulia said before, we had such experience last years in Donetsk, Luhansk regions, Oblast, and Crimea. So we will speak about two main points, how they try to Russify education. So first of all, there is a pressure on administration and employees of institution. So they try to provide, as I said before, their own head of school or university, or they're trying to find pro-Russian one. The other problem is they made teachers and other administrative workers to provide education under their rules. And another point is they try to change educational content. They review educational Ukrainian history. They do not agree with our point, or how they say it, propaganda. It's not correct history. And they try to provide new subjects, for example, Russian language and literature, social studies, their history with their own point of view. And about context, since the 2020, we do have only educational in Ukrainian, only primary school continue studying in Russian. For switch to Russian curriculum and avoid using Ukrainian. And also it's more about Luhansk and Donetsk Oblast. They continue mandatory militarization for students. It's maybe cadets, and other, it's when they prepare teenagers for being military in a few years. Next slide, please. And as Yulia said before, a lot of people were displaced to Russia, and we do not have actually relevant data how many children are there. And on this photo, it's only few photos. You can see how schools look like after Russian world came. It's only a couple of photos. I think you had a chance to see more in the internet. Next slide, please. They destroy buildings, and also even there are people who are trying to use covering. Next slide, please. And the last, another better scenario. No, it's not the better scenario now. So we have only approximate number of people people that were deported to Russia by their own will or not, and you see how many children can be there. Also, talking about children who are already in the territory of Russian Federation, the authorities announced lately that Ukrainian children do not speak Russian at a sufficient level, and that's why they're trying to provide like summer camp to study, where Ukrainian children can or should or have study Russian. Next slide, please. And now about the better scenario, if Ukrainian children are being in Europe countries, or for example, USA or Canada, whenever, but not in Russia Federation, they can have some risks also there, because our Ukrainian educational ombudsman report some cases when so-called Ukrainian Saturday school, like school of weekend, were actually organized by a Russian organization that presented themselves as Ukrainians, NGO or volunteers, and also they provided their own agenda. And also some parents and children, mostly children, have difficulties with communication with their own school, maybe because of administration have left the place, or they lost chance for communication, or maybe they do not have nice communication at all, and that's why they can lose the opportunity. But also Ukrainian ombudsman provided some problems that Ukrainian children can meet in other countries. And one of the biggest problem, of course, this is learning loss, because they have a language barrier, because a lot of children do not know other languages, not only English, for example. Yeah. And also they have huge psychological issues, because they saw the war, because they heard missile attacks, and because they had to cross the border, and maybe they have a huge experience how they left Ukraine. But of course, it's safer and better being there now, and we understand, and we absolutely grateful for this opportunity for our children, of course. So this is only a couple of words about problems that can meet any child in other countries. But the first point, and the most important, it's the safety, of course. And if you are not in Russia Federation, and unfortunately, if you're not in Ukraine now, you are safer. So it's the last slide, Julia, if I don't mistake. Yeah, so thank you for everyone for this time and for your attention. Nobody stopped us, as I see. Thank you also for support to Ukraine and for this place for us. We will be grateful for any question, any comments. So now the floor is.
Thank you very much. I will take over again from you, Tatiana and Julia. This was a load of information, and I really am very grateful for you to share these insights with us, and the findings of your monitoring and the assessment of what's going on, and what has already been developed in terms of Russification, what's happening in the different conditions in which children are, whether abroad or in areas they've been displaced to, or even in areas they've been deported to. So this is a very complex picture, And I assume we have some question already now, which I would like to invite everybody who has an immediate question that comes up to pose your question. I don't see yet any in the chat, but maybe we have here in the audience someone. Luisa.
Share the questions that I see in the Q&A because I think I'm the only one who has access to it. So there are a couple of questions / comments. The first one is regarding figures about Mariupol, because you quoted Kharkiv. So there is a question whether you know anything about the educational institutions in Mariupol, how many are destroyed or what the state of them is currently.
Who of you would like to comment on this?
Yulia could provide the comment on the spot. Yeah, maybe she had some problem with internet. I see that she can have. Okay, we had university in Mariupol that already were displaced before, and now it happened again. So if I don't mistake, we're talking about one universities. And also when we are talking about destroyed institution, Ministry of Education and Science in Ukraine created a website where you can watch it in real time on the number of institutions that were destroyed or just damaged. I can't provide with the actual number of schools, but maybe Yulia has any other comments.
Actually, as Tatiana said, you can see it on this website because they have the information about each region, but not without specification for the city, as I remember, but they have for every region the number of damaged and destroyed education institutions. Yeah.
Thank you. I see there is 2 more questions, actually one question and another comment. Maybe I read the question which says, what can you say about the image of Ukraine abroad after the 24th of February? This question is posed to both of you, either of you who would like to answer this question is asked to take the mic.
Thank you for this question. I think it would be interesting to hear from any of you these comments, because, for example, I didn't leave Ukraine for the last months, but it seems like people get no new information about Ukraine, and some people who are far from Ukraine, they know something new about Ukraine, where Ukraine is located at all. But also we see some like nice impression that Ukraine has a lot of let's say innovations. For example, we do have a progress with digitalization, because any child can have access to lessons online or on television and electronic books, any of these. But also maybe it's because of the previous wars or crises, when other countries that get refugees, they used to see another, not kind of people, of course, but other people who are left in their own country without any clothes or without any, I don't know, laptop, and without their own cars. But as we know, Ukraine have some new conditions, And I think that European countries see like people who are traveling, who are well educated, who have their own car, who I don't know, who keep studying still in a distance form or something like this. So it's only my imagination and what I can read from foreign experts and what I hear from my friends who are now abroad. But it would be also interesting to hear these comments from any of you. Sorry for this long answering.
Thank you very much, Tatiana. I think this is absolutely what we are now taking up in the panel discussion, and that is going to follow now. We have one more comment actually here from a colleague from, as I can see, the United States who has joined us. And maybe you'd like to briefly say what you've put in the chat before we proceed with the work on the ground in the different countries that we have invited to the floor. So who sent us the comment here, Bogdan Orishkevich from the United States, if you'd like to briefly say. No, okay. Well, we will take this up in the discussion then. Here we have one more other question. Actually, it's when I scroll down, it says, could you say about new education values in citizenship education, how we Ukrainians need to move forward in this way? This brings us already very much into a discussion which we do really need and want to take up. But if you allow me, Igor, to put this question a little bit back to our discussion later on, I think this would be important to assess in the final discussion of the session today. And we have one more comment from Mykola Skiba, who says concerning Mariupol, only one school has survived, or the school facility in Mariupol. Is there any other comment on this chat here?
May I just ask, just of interest, hello to everybody, Marcus Benes from Vienna.
Hello,
how many schools were existing in Mariupol before the attack of Russia?
Julia? Okay. When we'll answer the previous question, actually, we have only like about 10% of buildings that still exist.
Mm-hmm.
So
the question was actually before the war started, how many schools did exist in Mariupol?
Mm-hmm. If I don't mistake, of course, I should check, but it's about 20 or 27 schools were in the city.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think we proceed now with our panel discussion on the brief feedbacks and statements that we've asked several of you from different country perspectives actually to provide us with. It's we said a panel should discuss the organizing of the formal and non-formal process of education for refugees in different countries which actually have received lots of Ukrainian refugees since February 24th. So we invited experts from Moldova, from Poland, Austria, and Turkey to share their experiences and insights on that topic. And the first one I'd like to call to the floor is Liliana Nicolescu Onofre. Liliana was a Minister of Education Culture and Research in the government of Maya Sandu in 2019. She is now the chairwoman of the Parliamentary Committee on Culture, Education, Research, Youth, Sports and Mass Media in Moldova, and has a long-standing experience not only in the public sector, but also as an education expert, both in international and her own organization, and also, of course, in consultancy. I would like to hand over the floor to you, and thank you very much for having joined us for this discussion. Please, Liliana, the floor is yours.
Oh, yes. Hello, everyone. And thank you very much for inviting me to this discussion. I would like to start from expressing all our sympathy and empathy to all our colleagues in Ukraine. We've been the neighboring countries for a long time. And of course, there has been a lot of interaction, including the area of education between us, starting from the very, very old periods during the Soviets and afterwards, since we do have, as it's usually happening with the border countries, we do have villages populated with Ukrainians, so ethnic Ukrainians in Moldova, and the same thing, it's on the border of Ukraine with villages populated with the people of Romanian origin, Moldovan origin. But I have to say now, first of all, to underline that the question, how do we see Ukraine these days? It's really sincerely, we look up to our Ukrainian neighbors as to a model of high spirits and character in this fight for their own land, for their country, and for the freedom. So I have to say that now everyone in Moldova knows the words in Ukrainian, Когда настане день, закінчиться війна, все буде добре. Every one of us already know the meaning of these words in Ukrainian. Coming back to what we in Moldova started or have been able to do to support our neighbors, I have to say that on the very first day, of the second day of the start of the war and Russian invasion, we received 25,000 refugees just during one day. And the latest data, of course, it's updated every day. The latest I've looked up about the number of refugees that went through Moldova, remaining or going further, it's now more than 450,000 refugees that already passed through Moldova, out of which now the number of the ones who are still in Moldova, it's more than 90,000. And out of this, about 47,000 are minors, so children of various ages. And from the very beginning, the government in Moldova has worked on setting up places for housing. But I have to say that even we set up a lot of places, as the colleagues in Ukraine were mentioning, in the hostels of the educational institutions, in a variety of public buildings. But most of the people that decided to stay for a time in Moldova were hosted in families. In terms of supporting the families with children, immediately after we've been notified and found out about the war, the Ministry of Education immediately started to work on changing the regulations for admitting children to the schools so that it's possible to do it in a context where people just left their homes, sometimes without proper documentation or proper information on different aspects of schooling or of health. So regulations were updated in order to be able to receive the children and to accept children in school. And also the possibility to organize the enrollment of children to schools, and this happens in the case when parents decided to stay for a longer time in Moldova. However, many of the Ukrainian neighbors are not yet sure will they stay for a longer time. So the latest numbers about the children's enrollment in the schooling process, it's not that big. So we know that we have about 40,000 children in Moldova, Ukrainian children, but out of this, it's the latest data from 2 days ago, it's 1,802 children are already enrolled in school, and this is about 678 of them in the kindergarten, and then 1,000 and something are in general school, so primary or gymnasium or high school. The Ministry of Education in Moldova, it's in a very, very close connection and collaboration with the Ministry of Education in Ukraine. The government on the governmental side specially created to support the refugees, Dopomoga, GovMede, have placed the information, as colleagues from Ukraine were mentioning now, still there are schools that work online. So we try to make the information available and the links and all the possibilities for Ukrainian children that are not enrolled in schools, but to be able to join the lessons online at their schools in Ukraine or to work online with educational materials. Also, our ministry, together with UNICEF and representatives of National Commissioner for Refugees of the United Nations, are co-presidenting or it's a joint presidency of a committee for supporting refugee children. And this committee involves a great number of representatives from authorities from the national and regional level, but also a lot of representatives from NGOs and our developmental partners. So this committee meets initially once a week, now once in 2 weeks, and issues and possible solutions are discussed together. They created also a list of needs that have been identified so far for the children and refugee children, and the list is presented to UNICEF. And based on the various involvement of various NGOs, UNICEF already is supporting a lot of projects at the regional level with the small NGOs that offer a variety of support to families, to children for extracurricular activities. Also, an important activity was to work with teachers in order to help them to better integrate the children. So Council of Europe has helped with training of teachers. We do have a subject, education for society, and then specific attention to topics on welcoming and working with the children of Ukrainian refugees was a topic that the teachers were helped how to proceed, how to better facilitate this integration. And also the Norwegian Council for Refugees will be supporting us at the end of May with new trainings for teachers. We have a national center for assistance in psychology and pedagogy, and this center works now. There is a center at the national level and the center at each of our 35 rayons or regions, and they are working with the teachers and also with parents and children in order to offer psychological support. We have to say that there are still needs that we have to try to tackle, because of course when we talk about accommodating the children and supporting with things that are necessary for them in order to accommodate and in order to be able to access their online lessons, of course no one could foresee what will happen, how will happen this. The schools that accommodated the children didn't have a budget for food, for example. So UNICEF is supporting the government here, and also the local authorities are supporting and offering the necessary funds so that all the children that are in kindergartens and in the schools can receive a meal. Also, the ministry and UNICEF now are procuring about 1,000 tablets for the children so that they can have access to the online studies in the Ukrainian schools. It's also now an exploring of all possibilities whenever possible to integrate the Ukrainian children in our summer camps, in everything that goes normally as a process in the country. There is quite a high level of difficulty in trying to identify the needs of children that are now here in Moldova, because as I was saying, many of them with their parents are staying in the families. And when they crossed the border, it was very hard to try to have the whole picture. Some of them really passed through and went to Romania or to Poland. There are families that went back also to Ukraine. So the number is very fluctuant. But what we are trying now, we are trying to involve public authorities at the local level in order to identify more details. Where do we have students and their parents, or children of kindergarten age and their parents, and try to find more out about their needs in order to be able to better support them. So here again, it's about the need for simple necessary things, starting from clothing and food, but also teaching materials for children of school age, or play kits for children of kindergarten age, laptops, so all the things that might be needed and all the assistance that can be needed. So this is what we are trying to do. And definitely one thing that we also will try to find any type of assistance in order to be able to do this. It's also accommodating children depending on the schools and language of instruction in the schools they are in now. Most of the parents chose, of course, because it's easier, and both languages are Slavic. So from those 1,800 children, most of them are have chosen to work or to study in the Russian language schools, but also there are several hundreds in Romanian language schools. And here it comes a special support in order to be able to learn the language. So generally that will be the information in short. I just have to say that I was really looking into the report, and with your permission, I think if it's okay, then I will share this information with my colleagues and also publicly about what happened and how big is the damage that was done. And again, our heart is with you, all our colleagues in Ukraine. And even if we are in a very divided society in Moldova that has been really geopolitical, but I think no one can when we talk about a war and we talk about this atrocities, no one can just stay aside and not contribute and not support.
Well, thank you very much, Liliana. That was an incredibly comprehensive picture you were sketching here, and very important to hear what both in the formal and non-formal sectors is happening, besides all the private initiative that is taking place in Moldova. And this is really impressive and also fantastic to see what is happening. I imagine the difficulties of tracking and is something that we share in all countries, and I would like to now zoom a bit further north to Poland and give the word to Anna Gorska, who also has long-standing expertise in the field of education of children and youth with migration background, and also from the Roma community in Poland. And Anna Gorska is with the Foundation Institute of Public Affairs, and now dealing with the National Integration Evaluation Mechanism. So Anna, I'm passing on the word to you, please. And may I ask to try to keep an eye on the watch? We have 2 more countries that we would like to hear about, and so 5 to 7 minutes.
Yes, I am aware of that. However, it is quite difficult to show the context and broader picture and go in details if it comes to practice of things that are going on. However, I will try, and I would like to also share my presentation with you, which is always quite stressful for me. Oh.
Let us know if we can help. Share it instead of you.
I just would like to make it,
Press on the button below.
No, I just need to. This is
you can press the button F5.
F5. Okay.
Yeah.
That's something that I always. Oh, thank you very much. Because when I start differently, I cannot change slides that you can see. Okay, so first of all, actually, I would like to thank you for the invitation to the discussion, and I also thank CEDOS for publishing the reports that actually are quite important testimony if it comes to violating the right to education. So many thanks to you for sharing that with the world. Today, I would like to focus on access to education in Poland for children and youth from Ukraine. However, I would like to also give you some background referring to education of children from abroad, as they are called in our educational legal system. And first of all, a few data. So from the beginning of the war until now, more than 3 million people from Ukraine entered Poland. Most of them are Ukrainian citizens. 1.3 million enter Ukraine, mostly coming back to Ukraine. And among this 3.4 million, around 50% of entrances are children and youth under 18 years, which means school year. And this should be quite visible here. Regarding statistics, for example, of registration for temporary protection, which is the most common legal status chosen by people who came from Ukraine in recent months. So as you can see, among 1 million applications for the temporary protection, around 500,000 persons are actually under 18 years old, which means compulsory school year, at least in Poland. And exactly to present some context and framework that we used to have before the war started. If it comes to students we call it with migrant background or in educational system, they are called like children from abroad or students from abroad. At the beginning of this school year, it means in September, there were nearly 70,000 students from abroad. This is a broad category that includes children with refugee background, children children from legal, from the migration connected with job market, and also children remigrating to Poland, for example, from UK or other EU countries or any countries from the world. And I think that in comparison with this 500,000 that entered Poland, it is a very, very small number. However, also you can see how much the numbers have changed in recent years. So the numbers are growing quite rapidly. However, no one was, of course, prepared for such a big influx of children and youth as we are facing now. And regarding some instruments, the most important instruments in educational legal framework that existed there since 5 years at least, all of them, most of them since around 10 years. I would like to indicate Polish language classes that are available, and they are additional and free of charge. These are language classes that can be provided until language level of a child is sufficient for benefiting from process of education. And in brackets, you have numbers regarding children who benefited from particular from a given instruments that I'm indicating here. But these are also data for the beginning of school year. So it was around 40% of children using this instrument, and it is the most like the most used one and the most commonly known, I guess, also. Then second one, very important, is support from Teachers Aid, that we as civil society organizations, we usually call cross-cultural assistance. And this support is possible for up to for the period up to 12 months. And according to statistics, there were only 19% persons working as a teacher's aide. At the beginning of the school year, I can just tell you that like the numbers grew so much, has grown so much in recent months, and only in Krakow, for example, from the number of around 30 persons in February, there is already around 150 people working as teachers' aid. And the third instrument, which is quite important here, and also for education of Ukrainian children, are preparatory classes. As you can see, there were more than 100 classes in whole Poland at the beginning of the school year. Right now, there is around 150 classes only in Warsaw, so the number changed rapidly. And I also would like to mention about, I would say, 4 or 5 modes or schemes that children coming from Ukraine can follow right now. First of all, they can be enrolled into Polish educational system. And according to the statistic of Ministry of Education, around 200,000 students are enrolled into Polish educational system. Again, please try to compare it with the numbers I gave you. It was like 500,000. So it is not like, it is less than half of these children coming to Poland. And they can be enrolled in 2 ways, either to regular classes, and 84% of children is enrolled in this way, or into preparatory classes, it is 16%. I didn't give you like more details about preparatory classes, which is very, very important instrument introduced in 2016. I can give you if you are interested in that, but we don't have much time for that. What is really important is that the assumption is that it should help children to learn Polish language enough to go to regular classes in the period, for the period of 1 school year. So this is like the assumption behind it. However, there are like different, of course, challenges connected with that. I can tell you much more about that, but there is not much time left probably. And the second important option is actually staying in Ukrainian educational system and assumption is that the rest of students actually follow the Ukrainian curriculum via online education mostly, but also in Poland, one Ukrainian school existed before the war in Warsaw, approved by the Ukrainian Ministry of Education, and they, like, the number of students over there even grew from 200 students up to 1,000 students now. And there are 3 other Ukrainian schools that I know about that were open recently, in Krakow and 2 in Warsaw. So this is also a solution that can be used. And apart from this, probably the biggest group, there is also an issue of children who are actually left behind both systems, and it is still possible because we are, like, there are still children who cannot, like, who are not followed by probably any of schools institution, and these children, for example, are not ready yet to be enrolled in any kind of education, and some kind of daycare is organized for them in Poland. And just a few more words in order to give you some background how this discussion looks like in Poland right now. So Polish government's policy, we're focusing on recommending enrolling to preparatory classes. The minister in public speeches recommended that very strongly. However, as you saw, actually smaller number of children are enrolled in this way because of different challenges connected with that, of course. I can also give you more details later on if there will be time for that. And also, for the first time since 10 years, Ministry of Education started to popularize hiring teachers' aid. I mean, at least in declaration, because it is also connected with fundings and with other kind of support for this institution, which is not happening. And the assumption behind and the logic behind the ministry is also that enrolling students from Ukraine should not disrupt education of Polish students, which are words very often repeated by the minister. However, of course, some adjustments were done in a legal framework, some changes were introduced. Most of them were very technical in order to just make education available for more children, which means extension or limits of children in classes, in regular classes as well as in preparatory classes, different options to organize classes outside school buildings, extending minimum hours of Polish per week, which is also important. And giving and what is also important, a bit more flexible rules for hiring school staff regarding the children who regarding people who can work with Ukrainian children. And these are the last slides. I wanted to introduce, I wanted also to indicate some challenges that we're facing. Actually, most of issues are showing that there have been neglected issues in and time of crisis just exposed that. We of course have challenge of very limited resources, especially of local governments who are responsible mostly for operational of implementing education. I mean, financial staff and also infrastructures. It is worth to mention that there was sort of crisis in the educational system in Poland before the war regarding shortage in staff, for example, and there are tensions between the ministry and schools union, and there is a big debate on that. Of course, well, maybe not of course, but school staff is not prepared enough to work with children with the migrant background, and this is something which was and very, like, well known from many years, however, not very supported by the ministry if it comes to working with children who do not speak Polish language, like in order to communicate and enough to communicate or enough to participate in educational process. If it comes to cultural sensitivity, if it comes to anti-discrimination, there has not been such kind of training in curricula for teachers. There's issue of exam adjustment, and there's a big debate on that because ministry didn't want to adjust exams for Ukrainian children who just came, and these are important in order to for their future in education. Their lack of clear guidelines for schools, of course, and local governments regarding grades or enrolling. There is issue of poor cooperation of Polish Ministry of Education with CSOs and local governments. There is unequal distribution of new educational needs. In big cities, there are big groups that are actually very hard to this is hard to manage them. In smaller communities, there are not enough resources, so there are challenges even in this way, and there is no clear strategy, and actually there's a big uncertainty regarding next school year, how it will look like, how many children will stay. There are also some kind of fears about some tensions between Polish part of school community, I mean parents, teachers, and of course children, and Ukrainian or other parts. And what is also very important is that all educational debate right now is focusing on Ukrainian children, but there are also other groups of foreign children in Poland, and we cannot forget about that. And what I just don't want to go to details, but I didn't want to leave it with the negative picture. So I just want to say that there is a lot of people and with collaborative attitude, and there is a lot of grassroots activities in order to respond to needs of the educational system right now. There is a lot of platform and networking, also with international organization as were mentioned before. And we are trying to do our best in order to respond to the current needs.
Thank you very, very much, Anna. This was indeed a very complex picture again of immigration society in the making, and how it is dealing with integrating different groups into the educational systems. So I think a topic for conferences. And as Luisa said at the beginning of this call, we really can only very briefly and superficially touch upon the current situation, but we find it very important that all you who are so deeply engaged in those processes actually share this with a wider audience, and that we got to hear the CEDOS report, and then we will follow up on the issues that you've been raising and problematizing, because there is a lot of transfer of knowledge and learning that we can actually do. And I would like to now pass on the word to Markus Benisch, who has joined us from Austria. He's the head of the section for preschool, primary and secondary education in the Ministry for Education, Science and Research. And since February 22, he also coordinates Ukrainian affairs in the ministry. I won't go into more detail in your biography, but simply pass on the word to you, Markus, and thank you very much for joining us. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for having the opportunity to attend this meeting. Actually, I would like to share with you just two slides, actually. I have to give free my screen, actually, right now. If I'm able to, well, actually, I'll try. I mean, the basic thing about Austria right now is that by about now, this week, we have approximately 10,500 pupils from Ukraine in our school system. Regarding most of them in primary school system, actually I would say 40%, 45% actually, and secondary education and higher education, I would say 30% and some between. Right now we have a situation actually where there's a discrepancy between the regions. Vienna, for instance, which is one region, and also the capital, has by about 1/3 of all pupils, and some other states also have by about 1/3, and other parts of Austria are not affected as strongly as for instance, Vienna. The challenge right now is that we are very keen on to bring all the pupils into our school system, to integrate them, because we have some clear regulations how we can support this kind of pupils who come as refugees to our country. And the most important thing, and I want to emphasize this, is of course that they are able to communicate with our people actually, and the basis therefore is that they start learning German as a language as fast as possible. Therefore, we have additional resources. We have a very clear system right now that, for instance, if you have a school in Austria, regardless which type of school, and you have 8 children where there has been checked that they have no or very limited capabilities regarding speaking German, then you have to form an own, I call it German preparatory class, which also right now we introduced this system 4 years ago, worked quite well. Right now we have in Austria, additionally to the system of existing preparatory classes, there are now more than 100 preparatory classes with pupils from Ukraine, where they started learning German. What we see right now is actually, and that's different. So the difference to other refugee crises we were confronted with in the last decades, that based on the fact that the conflict in this intensity started quite rapidly, and the consequences were felt by us very shortly, that we see that the pupils come from this kind of educational structure, which is very positive, and we also see that there is a very high affinity of people regarding education. It's fairly easier to bring them back into structure. That's a difference to the situation we were confronted with 5 years ago, or maybe 6 to 7 years, when we had the refugee crisis with people from the Middle East. That's basically something different right now. We also, the most important thing right now is we have provided information, a lot of information on our official homepage regarding the structure of the Austrian education system. And with this also, that's very important for us right now. We do respect, and we see from this point that this is quite positive, that the pupils from Ukraine want to stay in touch with their school system. But on the other side, and as far as I'm informed, that's a problem or a challenge for all the countries in Europe. We have to bring them into the education compulsory system as we see it right now, and in our country actually, and we have to bridge the fact that they want to stay in touch with the education system of Ukraine, but also the fact that we have to take care of that they start to integrate into our system and our country as fast as possible. Nevertheless, we know that they want to return as fast as possible, and we want to support them in every kind of way. But that's quite tricky as far as I'm informed, for all the countries in Europe right now. And that's the biggest challenge, because we see right now that we have by about 10,500 pupils in our school system. But on the other hand, we do know that there are more than 15,000 pupils regarding the age of compulsory education in Austria who would have to be in our school system, but they aren't right now. So on every level, regional level, federal level of the state government, we try to do everything to bring them into the school system, because we are concerned a little bit that with the end of the Ukrainian school year, which is, as far as we are informed, end of May, that there will be a situation that with the beginning of June, maybe some 1,000 pupils additionally will come to our schools, which is an extreme challenge. Right now, I would say we have managed it fairly well. We have these preparatory classes. We have provided computers, laptops for those who needed them. We provided opportunities, a framework, so actually that within our school system, they also can join the online courses from Ukraine if they also are able to attend the most important parts of our classes right now. Right now, we are working on a solution regarding those who have taken their finals in Ukraine and now want to join an Austrian university, so they can switch smoothly into the university. And we're also right now working on a regulation that those who now come to Austria in the school system can get into the next classes without losing 1 year. So as much flexibility as possible, but for making this possible, transparent, and with all the challenges, we have to have them in our schools right now, all of them. That's the biggest challenge right now. And also, I mean, as far as we are informed, that's a problem for all the European countries. It's a question of having sufficient numbers of teachers and personnel for this additional education. Right now, we also created a framework that teachers from Ukraine can now work in our schools as assistant teachers right now. That works very well. I suppose the numbers are a little bit volatile, but I would say that we have now 100 to 150 teachers in our school system, additionally from Ukraine, working now and assisting the work in the specific classes. And the other big challenge also now will be regarding sufficient support, psychological support for the group. But it's the same as in other European countries. You simply need to have the people, you need to have the experts for making all these kind of services possible. Well, that's maybe the overview of the situation right now. What I would say is that based on the recent developments and all the refugees who came to Austria in years before, and also the developments with the COVID crisis, school system is in crisis all the time, and has had some kind of sessions learned, and so right now, and I hope it will stay as this. To some extent, it works smoothly because also of the fact that the people from Ukraine coming now to Austria, also regarding the children, they have a strong interest in preserving and continuing education. And yeah, we do everything we can to support that. We also try to cooperate with one existing Ukraine school in Vienna. But our focus right now has to be that we bring all these pupils from Ukraine into our school system. And also additionally, we're also now working on a program for older pupils between 14 to 18 years. Well, that's it.
Well, thank you very much. That was, again, a deep dive into a very challenging situation of a permanent crisis with now an additional huge disruptive challenge. But it seems that there are a lot of things on their way, actually, how to tackle it. And I'm very glad that we are now actually closing our session with the view from someone who is working in the education of educators. Serap Emil, as an associate professor in educational sciences at the Middle East Technical University in Ankara since 2012, is doing research, including teaching in higher education, student engagement, and higher education development. She teaches at bachelor level teacher education programs and at graduate level educational administration and planning. Please, Serap, the floor is yours. I'm looking forward to your perspective on the issue.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for the report on such a difficult topic. I think it's really important, this report, in terms of both for policy decision makers in Ukraine, in education decision makers, and also for following up with the current situation of education. When I was listening, I was also wondering, I was thinking about a refugee education for Syrian refugees in Turkey. I'm gonna, really quickly try to share that experience since 2014 in Turkey. And looks like all the things have been done is pretty much in line with, what we have been doing so far in Turkey. And one thing just, came to my mind about the well-being of students, of the children. I think that would be a very important topic to think, both for Turkey and, the Syrian refugee and killed Syrian children, and also for Ukrainian children, that we need to also think about the well-being of children beyond the fact that we need to go back to normality, normal life in education. So I truly appreciate, and I will really briefly summarize what we have been doing in Turkey for the, another refugee situation. And starting from very beginning, Turkey, of course, responded to the education of children and in aspects of the integration to education, but also well-being, as I mentioned, well-being of those children who have been through a very difficult, emotion situations during the war. And so we had, temporary education centers in Turkey before, we integrated the children into the public school system. And because, of course, back then we didn't know the situation, whether it was a temporary or it was a more for 8 years. Hopefully the situation will be resolved very soon in Ukraine. But we we started with temporary education centers, try to work with kids in those schools together with volunteers, teachers, Turkish teachers, and also Syrian teachers. So the Turkish government, mostly centralized system by Minister of National Education, dealt with the whole crisis, and they tried to coordinate all the actions from the center, from the minister, and so that they worked with teachers, again, Turkish teachers, Syrian teachers, who can actually work in those temporary education centers. So that was important in terms of their feeling more closer to their own kind of setting and culture. We later, along the way, 2018, those temporary education centers stayed for a long while, actually, until 2020, and they closed all of those centers, mostly in the camps, but now they are all closed, and all the kids are trying to be integrated into public school system in Turkey. But by 2018, they also had this accelerated learning program. So before they, transferred all the students to public schools, they had this accelerated learning programs for children 10 to 18 years old. And we also, as you all know, we also had, funds like EU funds and UNICEF supported actions, Turkish Red Crescent, Ministry of National Education, as well as Labor, Social Services and Family, and also disaster or risk management, disaster management. So because this is a disaster, that's why what I learned from my experience, that this is a disaster, management situation where we need to also work with all those, stakeholders. So that's what Turkey did. And right now, in terms of course, the public school integration was difficult in Turkey to a certain extent because of the rate of discrimination, prejudices, and bullying, unfortunately, in school. So it's not only enough to open up the schools to kids, but also you have to deal with those, discriminatory actions, not just by students, but families and also teachers too, unfortunately. So, and Turkey, is trying to deal with that over the, 8 years. There are certain particular areas in Turkey, southeastern areas and cities where people more, Syrian refugees are living. And so for that, they also opened up some community centers where they can actually have some support in terms of language, because language is still, as you all mentioned, is still an issue. So that language for the kids and also for the adults, and also opportunities, employment opportunities. So they started in those community centers, they started doing some, employment opportunities, vocational trainings, so that they can also, have some skills, and they can, utilize those skills. And maybe last thing is higher education. So at the K-12 level, what they did, again, public schools are free in Turkey, both at the K-12 level and also higher education level. So in Turkey, we don't have tuition. So we have tuition-free higher education system. So for that reason, they were able to integrate too. So far, we have about 33,000 Syrian students in higher education system. Each school, each university, we have a central examination system for university, but for them, they have a separate, each institution has its own exam system to select those and place those students in the system. For K-12, it's more like the neighborhood, wherever they're living in, that they can go to the public school in the region. And then finally, I would say, again, with those community centers recently, and also schools, some of the schools by EU funding, and also some already established, but 55 from World Bank funding is also planned right now. So there will be also schools particular to, not particular to Syrian kids, but also, increase the number of schooling so that they can have more opportunity. So that's where we are in Turkey. And again, the current number of Syrian refugees officially is 3.7 million, but they also talk about 5 million not recorded refugees. About maybe 30,000 of students are out of school right now, and about let me see, maybe 80,000 of roughly 690,000 Syrian children are now under temporary protection, which means they have the right to education, and also they're in school system in Turkey. So that's what I can say from Turkish education system. And again, that we are working toward more of the integration in the long run with some support, but also well-being of those students. I know that my colleagues are working on, from psychology and counseling psychology departments, working on particular projects to integrate Syrian kids into the system. That's all I can say, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Serap. I think the bottom line of what you've been describing is really that the whole complexity of well-being is not just to keep going in being educated, but to be embedded, to be integrated, to be moderated with local communities, and to be helped with trauma is such a huge task. And Turkey has worked on that in an incredible dimension of the catastrophe that is ongoing in its neighborhood. Thank you all so much. I will now hand over to Luisa, who will give us the last few minutes of a joint thinking and seeing how we continue from here. Luisa, please.
Thank you, Caroline, and thank you also everyone for providing such a dense content within those limited 7 to 10 minutes time. We really do appreciate it. There were lively questions coming in the chat, and I think we were able to answer most of them. What I would do before us having like a final question to look into, I just wanted to try to summarize our conversation up until now. I think from the point of view of our colleagues in Ukraine, obviously there are two things standing out. The one is the incredible damage that is being caused on the educational sector as such, thinking both in terms of infrastructure, but also in what's happening with children and with their teachers and families. But the other question is obviously this aggressive Russification that takes different shapes and forms. And it seems to me that the work that has been done by the Ukrainian educational ombudswoman, if I got it right, is key. And it's also key to get these messages out there to other partners and countries in Europe so that they keep them in mind. And from the point of view of neighboring countries neighboring to Ukraine, but also other European countries, I think I see, broadly speaking, two approaches. Countries that are faced with a large number of Ukrainian kids obviously try to take a more structural approach, like in Poland. And then in Moldova, where children are at least in lesser amount compared to at least to Poland, it's not that the approach is not structured, but it seems to me to be a little bit more, it's not only the educational authorities, but it's also NGOs, and UNICEF is playing a big role, and also local authorities, which I think is also pretty important. And I found the feedback from our colleague in Austria really illuminating, because I think it brings the whole discussion to one of the key challenges in the current situation. And it's namely how to bring in sync kids that are in the hosting countries with the local educational sectors. And I think this is a very important conflict line, because how do you navigate between the temporary and the midterm or long term? Because all of us want to think in temporary terms, but unfortunately we don't know. And so how to navigate the situation, I think this is a question for us to look into. And then obviously the other bigger question that I think was also nicely shaped around the end of the conversation is about this whole basket of the psychological aspect of the war, the psychological burden for kids and for teachers and their families, obviously, but also the fact that there is discrimination, there is bullying, even in countries that are, you know, friendly and open and empathetic and sympathetic. I think there too, it's just unfortunately in human nature. So if you allow me, maybe just to do a very quick round, I don't want to be pointing to anyone. Maybe our colleagues from Ukraine would feel like touching upon this question. What do you think? How can we address this almost impossible dilemma of both having Ukrainian children, integrate them in the local educational sectors, but at the same time giving the opportunity to continue being in sync with the Ukrainian educational sector? Because I think this seems to be, from where I'm standing and from what I try to listen to, one of the biggest challenges, actually. So how do we navigate this almost impossible dilemma? Can we actually navigate it at all? Yulia, Tatiana, I'm looking at you.
Yeah, it seems like you should have a bus to someone. So the first point here is, of course, as you all said before, is psychological help to all refugees and children who are coming to you. And also, it's quite not very popular topic about discrimination and others, because it's not the question number one, unfortunately. But from our perspective, the first and the most important thing is to push government of all countries to give to Ukraine, unfortunately, more and more weapons, because this is the question number one. Sorry, but I should to say this also here. Yeah, and I think that we have a lot of experience from other wars and crises in order to help children, and also I hope that a lot of children can come back, and this support is not going to continue so far. I hope so. Yulia?
I agree with Tatiana, actually, and I think that this support that your countries can give for Ukrainian refugee children and students, it is very helpful, and it can help them even if they will return to Ukraine. And I hope that most of them will return to Ukraine then. And the problem is that we don't know how long it will be. And that's why, as Jana said, yeah, unfortunately, we need weapons. But I think that we and you can manage this process, actually, and we will try it.
Thank you. And I do hear you from the beginning of your presentation where you said something along the lines of, regardless of what, safety first. So with or without within the educational system, in hosting countries, safety comes first. And I think we do hear that in your outcry for support. There have been a bunch of questions on civic education, and I think we will take these conversations up in our following conversation, because we've just, I think, exploded the timeframes here, and we don't want to take up much more of your time, because we also know you have other obligations. I just want to open up again to see if there is any final remarks, really, one or two sentences you wanted to share with each other, with our participants, just openly looking at all of you, all of our speakers who have been also very patient and have tried to deal with the time limitations. If there is anything.
I might, Luisa, maybe I just wanted to say, I think, this unfortunate experience is teaching us how important to, not just on the value, or to not just only include citizenship values, but also global citizenship, how we understand each other, how we learn about each other, how we accept each other, because these crises also bring all those, discriminatory practices, unfortunately, that we have to be more, diligent, intentional, deliberate in our action. And I'm trying to do that with my students in higher education classroom. I do have, by the way, Ukrainian students, Syrian students in my classroom. And I, what I do particularly address those issues and, very carefully. But I think this is teaching us that we have to, we can be in any, anybody can be in a situation of refugee, unfortunately, in this current world. 43 million, I guess, in by 2011, million people displaced in the world. So that teaches us something very important, that we have to be very careful, and we have to be very responsible, teachers, educators in our, in our work. So that's I want to say. And again, my heart is with you and with all of you, and thank you for your hard work.
Thank you, Serap. Marcos, please go ahead.
Just I can assure one thing, that we will do whatever we can to support the Ukrainian pupils in our school system, actually, to come to feel maybe safe, or to have a place actually in our school system right now, and in Austria and in the Austrian society right now. It's a challenge, but it's a challenge for all the other countries right now. That's the one thing actually I want to say at the end of this meeting. As all the others, we hope that the war will end as soon as possible, and the outcome will be in favor of Ukraine. Basically, as long the situation is as it is, we will try to support the people who come to Austria as refugees as good as we can. But basically, we also have a very, very strong interest that they have chance and the framework to integrate into our educational system, and also use the opportunities offered by us, because regarding our universities, our school system, all the other opportunities that exist.
Thank you. And I think this is a message that is gladly heard by our friends in Ukraine.
I actually also, I don't want to be impolite, but I have to leave right now, actually.
This is perfect.
I hope it's okay. Thank you very much for
This
the
is perfect.
attending this
Perfect.
meeting. And if there are questions regarding Austria and so on, please do not hesitate to write me a mail or to contact me also by telephone.
Thank you
Goodbye.
very much.
Goodbye.
I just
Thank you.
thank you. To use the opportunity to also say that in the Q&A, we have received a lot of different hints for offers for support, etc. So we will make sure we share that in our group, but also obviously our audience has complimented all the different presentations. So thank you very much, all of you, for your input. And if you are willing to share your presentations, we will also gladly either upload them on our website or distribute them among the participants of the event so that they can use them as a future reference. So thank you very much for being with us tonight. Thank you very much for having taken the time and for having done the effort to follow the impact of the war in Ukraine, first and foremost to our friends in Ukraine, because it is emotional, but at the same time, you were doing your job. So huge congratulations to you. And we will be, all of us, very happy from within the Civics Hub, but I'm pretty sure I'm also speaking on behalf of our panelists tonight. They'll be more than happy to join a future conversation around the same topics. And maybe this time we take a little longer, so we have really enough time to dive a little deeper into that. And set up, just to say, we're taking up your hint to the intercultural aspect of citizenship education, which is also our main field of activity. Most probably there will be a follow-up invitation to all of you to help us discuss what's the impact of the war right now on citizenship education. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for taking the time. Everything, all the materials will be made available afterwards in a recording of the event. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, and have a good evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.